Sir is presently working as professor in HOD, Department of Pediatric Surgery and Pediatric Urology at Amrita Institute of Medical Sciences, Kochi. Sir is one of the pioneers of the pediatric surgery. He has done tremendous work in fetal surgery in India. And Sir is a great innovator of many techniques in minimal access pediatric surgery. And Sir is the person behind Mohan's urethral valvulotome instrument, which is used in the treatment of posterior urethral valve. Sir, we are very much pleased to have you in between us, sir.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure.
Yes. So
Carry on. It
can I
doesn't
continue?
matter who takes, why, even if the greatest person on the earth, it's a student that matters. So we'll come back to you.
Okay. So, can I go to the presentation, sir?
Yes, sure.
Sir, my child in this case is her name is Anabia. She's a female child of 9 months age, sir. She's a resident of Hyderabad. The informant was mother, who is a reliable informant. This child came to the hospital with chief complaints of fever, excessive cry during maturation, and vomitings of 5 days duration. Coming to the history of present illness, the child has fever, which is of 5 days duration, and it was of high grade. It was not associated with chills and rigors, and the fever relieved temporarily after taking antipyretics medications. Child had vomitings, which was also 5 days duration. It lasted for only initial 2 days. It was non-bilious and it relieved on taking treatment. Child is also having associated history of excessive cry while passing urine, while voiding urine. There is no associated history of any frequency, urgency, or dribbling of urine. There is no history of any refusal of feeds or loss of weight or failure to thrive. There is no history of any constipation. There is no history of delayed milestones.
So you're saying that child is perfectly well before 5 days. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir. Previously, she did not have any symptoms, sir.
Okay. What else is there?
So these symptoms are leading to a febrile urinary tract infection, sir.
Mm-hmm. What else in the history? I mean, okay, you got this much of history. What do you think is a probable diagnosis? I mean, after the history, if your history is complete, you should be able to, make 4 or 5 differential diagnoses.
Yes, sir.
Then when you do the examination, you narrow down it a little further, and then with the with the investigations, you narrow it down further. So now here, with this much of history, what is that you are thinking of?
Sir,
What is the child?
It's a child is having a febrile urinary tract infection, sir.
Mm-hmm.
So, as the child is not having any features of any history of refusal of feeds or loss of failure to thrive, there will not be any history of recurrent infections that we may have missed it. It's an acute febrile UTI.
Yeah. Why should a child at 9 months of age get an acute febrile UTI?
So, there may be many reasons behind the urinary tract infections in a female child. So that may be so anatomical causes which are causing obstruction to the urinary tract, causing urinary stasis, resulting in infections. Like any simple labial adhesions, which will cause retention of urine, or any urethral polyps, which are causing urethral obstruction, or any uretroceles, which is causing urethral obstruction, or
how will a uretrocele present?
So there are many types of uretroceles. In the case of cecouretrocele, there is a large uretrocele which will protrude through the urethra, causing obstructions.
No. I am asking, if you are thinking of a uretrocele, in this particular case, what will be the presentation? In this child,
maybe a chronic.
You have elucidated a lot of symptoms, right?
Yeah, it may be a chronic infection will be there rather than acute presentation.
Okay, so you think this is a probably, but then is there anything in the history that will suggest that this is a chronic problem? But you said before 5 days, child is perfectly, before 9 months, child is perfectly normal.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
And there may be vesicoureteric reflex.
That's we are going into diagnosis. That we'll come to later.
Okay, sir.
Come to after examination, investigation. No, I'm trying to lead you to another reason. I mean, what are the reasons for? Okay, let's say it's reflex. Let's say you are thinking of hair fall. What can cause that in a child, female child, 9 months?
It can be any bladder bowel dysfunction associated
You
with
said there is no history of
no history of
constipation.
constipation, sir.
Right. So that's unlikely. No dribbling, no
Yes, sir.
retention. Okay. What else? Okay. What I was trying to lead you into is there is another aspect to the whole thing, which is a neurogenic bladder.
Okay.
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 So if there is a high pressure bladder due to any reason, that can produce a UTI, a reflux and a UTI,
Okay.
right?
Yes, sir.
So regarding that, is there a history, like in your history, you haven't mentioned
sir.
about
Actually, there is no
seizures?
history of swellings in the spine, sir. Swelling of
Okay,
the
that's
spine.
fine. That is fine. That is very unlikely that the mother will miss that. But
Yes.
is there a history of a febrile seizure or any
No,
sort of seizure?
No,
Is
sir.
there a history of child nocturnal enuresis?
No, sir.
Is there a history of child not able to walk or falling down
So
very
it's only
often?
9 months of child, sir. Up to now, there is no history of a delayed milestone, sir.
No delayed milestones.
No delayed
But
milestones, sir.
okay, so there's nothing to suggest a neurogenic component over there,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, carry on. Let's go into the examination point.
So past history, it is not significant. So no history of similar complaints in the past.
Right.
So antenatal history, they had a non-consanguineous marriage. The mother was antenatal registered, and the antenatal scans were normal, sir.
Okay.
So the perinatal history, birth order is 1. Child is born with term, normal vaginal delivery, cried immediately after birth, and the birth weight was 2.5 kgs. Sir.
Okay.
And the child was exclusively breastfed.
Okay.
Coming to the immunization history, child is immunized up to date as per the schedule.
May not be very significant in this case.
Treatment history, not significant, sir. Family history.
What do you mean by family history not significant? What actually you're thinking about?
Sir, in case of a vesicourethral reflux, there may be siblings.
Yes.
Actually, it's a birth order 1, but there may be associated reflex in the VUR in the siblings.
Exactly. So that is something which, so instead of saying family history, nothing significant, you say there is no history of the sibling having urinary tract infection or any urological problem.
Okay.
Right? Because that's what you will get in the history. You may not get a diagnosis what the sibling is having. Okay. So when you are presenting, you present that salient points and what is not important to that particular case, you don't have to go into detail. Why I'm saying is, in the final exam, the time given to each candidate is limited. Okay. Now, if you waste a lot of time talking about immunization history and perinatal history, whatever, then you may not get time to talk about the other things which is more important.
Okay.
So that's what I was trying to do. Okay, carry on.
Coming to general examination, child is active, moderately ill, moderately nourished. There is no pallor, no icterus, no cyanosis, no clubbing, no pedal edema, no generalized lymphadenopathy. Pulse rate is 110 per minute. Blood pressure is 90/50 mm of Hg recorded in the right arm in supine position. Respiratory rate is 25 per minute. Temperature was normal. Her weight was 7.5 kgs. Mid-arm circumference was 12 centimeters. The head circumference was 44 centimeters. And the head-to examination was normal. There was no dysmorphic features.
Is the BP normal or not?
Sir, actually, for this age, it must be around 80/50 millimeters.
Okay. How do you calculate the BP? I mean, on the bedside, how do you know that this is normal or this is not normal?
But by measuring.
No, measuring is okay. But how will you know what is a normal BP?
Any rule or no more?
No.
See, the American College of Surgeons, I mean, the rule of the thumb is 80 plus twice the age in years. Okay. That will be the systolic, and 2/3 of that will be the diastolic. Now, there are nomograms, there are graphs which you can actually really calculate that. But then on the bedside, it may not be very, very easy to do that, like in the OPD to look at the nomogram. But otherwise, the rule of the thumb is like, so this child will be, if it is 80 plus twice the age in years, it will be 9 plus 1.8, so about 82.
Yes.
And 2/3 of that will be the diastolic.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, that's That's just a easy way to calculate. Okay, carry on.
To abdominal examination, upper abdomen is normal, umbilicus inverted, transverse, slightly shifted downwards. There are no visible dilated veins or no visible pulsations, no scars or sinuses over the abdomen. Renal angles appear normal. Henile orifices are free. External genitalia appear normal.
Okay. Again, here the external genitalia gets a little bit of importance, isn't it?
Yes,
Because it's one of the cause can be labile adhesions. So I
yes,
think over here, instead of saying external genitalia is normal, it may be better for you to say external genitalia, there is no labile adhesion, the vaginal orifice is seen, urethral orifice is separate.
okay, sir.
Okay, carry
Okay,
on.
sir. On palpation, abdomen is soft. There is no local raise of temperature. There is no tenderness. There is no organomegaly. The bladder is not palpable.
Okay, here again, you are thinking about a case with urinary tract infection.
Yes.
So where do you check for the tenderness?
Renal angle tenderness, I will
Yes.
see, sir.
So instead of
There
saying
is
no
no renal angle.
tenderness, yeah,
Okay, sir.
just say there is no renal angle tenderness.
Okay.
And instead of no organomegaly, you can say kidneys are not palpable.
Okay.
Right? Okay.
Okay.
Carry on.
Coming to percussion, liver dullness starts in the fifth intercostal spine in the midclavicular line. Liver span is 7 centimeters. Auscultation, bowel sounds are heard are normal. Parectal examination was normal. External genitalia appears normal. Examination of the other system, spine examination normal. Respiratory, central nervous system and cardiovascular system examination is normal.
Here again, the parectal examination in this particular case is important, isn't it? You have to say there is no fecal loading, there is no anal stricture, and there is no mass palpable
Per rectum.
per rectum. Because they are important in the sense that suppose this child has a anterior myelomeningocele.
Okay.
Okay, or the child is loaded with stools. We know that history of normal stools is not correct, isn't it?
Yes.
So it's better to say, just elaborate it a little bit there. Okay, carry on.
To summarize this case, is a 9 months old female child was presented with history of fever with excessive cry while passing urine, was associated with vomiting. A general examination, abdominal examination, systemic examination was normal.
Okay, now you're finished with the history. Again, we, when you're having a diagnosis, your diagnosis is vasculotic reflux. And we also discussed that the cause can be a local anatomical problem, it can be a secondary reflux. What is secondary reflux?
So it's secondary to pathology elsewhere. So it may be an outlet obstruction or pathology in the bladder where there is an increase in the intravesical pressure.
Yeah, basically when there is a high pressure bladder inducing a reflux, a secondary reflux. If there is an anatomical deformity at VUJ, then that is a primary reflux. So here now one thing we discuss in the history taking is a neurogenic component, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, it could be a DSD, detrusor sphincter dysenergy, or it could be anything neurogenic, non-neurogenic, neurogenic bladder, or even a neurogenic bladder because just because there is a spine examination is normal doesn't mean there is no diastrophy, there is no lipoma, intradural lipoma, etc., etc. So now how do you rule out in your examination these things? The spine, the nerve supply is normal. What are the examination available? How will you do that?
We'll see for the starting from the symptoms.
No, forget about symptom. I'm talking about examination. You finished with the symptom. You have finished the exam, but you missed on that. That's why I'm pointing it out. So, what all will you check?
In case of neurological problem, there may be a bowel bladder dysfunction associated with motor abnormalities in the lower limbs.
Okay, as you said, it's a 9-month-old, so it's difficult to assess motor abnormalities, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, what are the tests you do? What are the things you do to rule out a neurogenic bladder? What are the reflexes you check?
Female.
Come on, that's important. No? What is bulbocavernosus reflex? We press on the clitoris, is the female, in the male you press on the glans. And then you find whether the anal sphincter is contracting or not.
Yes, sir.
What is the root value of that? Which is what are you checking in that?
L2, L3, L4.
Sorry?
S1, S1,
Yeah,
S2,
S2 is 4.
S2, S4.
Okay, that is a arc over there. Now you want to check above that. You see what is the nerve supply of the bladder?
Sir,
Which all segments?
it is actually from the lumbar and sacral segments, sir.
Okay,
L1 to
fine.
L5 and S2, S2 to S4, sir.
Great. Okay. So how do you check L1 to L2? What supplies L1 to L2 or T12 to L2 or whatever?
It is through the hypogastric nerve. It supplies the bladders.
Great. Okay. What supply is it?
It's a parasympathetic supply.
Parasympathetic? What supply is it?
Sir, it's a sympathetic
Yes.
supply.
Is it sympathetic supply?
Sir.
Yes. Then
The
what is the
parasympathetic number is
parasympathetic?
S2 to S4, sir. It's through the pelvic nerve, sir.
Pelvic nerve. Great. So what supply what does the parasympathetic supply does to the bladder?
Sir, it causes the detrusor contraction, sir, through the muscarinic receptors.
Great. So sympathetic does just the opposite. It relaxes the
Yes, sir.
bladder, right? And contracts the sphincter. Okay. So now, how do you make out that L1, L2 or L1 T12 to L2 is not involved? Which reflex will you check? Chromatic reflex, have you heard of?
Yes, sir. It's in male. We'll scratch over the
Yes, medial aspect
medial
of the
aspect
thigh
of
and
the
see
thigh, sir.
whether
There will be elevation of the
Medials.
testis.
yes, but of
Elevation
course,
of
it's
the
a
testis.
female child. You can't do that over here.
Yes.
What are the one more test that you can do? What is it? One more or two more actually. Head of anal wink. Anal wink. That you scratch on the side of the anus in a radial manner and the sphincter contracts. Okay.
Okay.
Well, how will you check S1? Because these are all S2, S4 mainly. How will you check S1?
Yes.
What is the root? What supplies in the leg? Which part is supplied by S1? Ankle reflex. Okay, if you check the ankle reflex, that will tell you whether S1 is intact.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so once you have done this, now you know for sure that your neurogenic component is ruled out, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Suppose you find any of these things are missing, like either chromatic is missing or this is, what will you do next?
I will verify the neurogenic bladder, sir.
No. What will you do next? See, you are checked and you find S2, S4. I mean, anal wink is not there or bulbar cavernous is not there. What do you do next?
I will do a MRI spine to
Lot
rule
of
out any
money.
spine.
You go back to the
X-ray, sir.
history again.
Okay, sir.
You ask the mother because there is something you are missing in the history. Because when the history and the examination doesn't tally, usually the history is at fault.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So that is what, because you have to complete that history, because you'll be given a paper to write down in the exam, all those things. So, I mean, if you have missed a point, you can always go back and add on it before your examiner comes, right?
Okay.
And not only for the exam, even for the, you're working up a patient in the OPD, because you're passed out, you're already sitting as a consultant somewhere. And then you're writing, I mean, you're examining a patient. It's always important to go back and recheck. Okay. Okay, fine. Let's move on.
Yes, sir.
So you have a febrile UTI for your symptomatic UTI for evaluation.
Yes, sir.
What will you do?
So next I went for the investigations, sir. So laboratory investigations. Did a hemoglobin, a complete blood picture. The hemoglobin is 10.2 grams per deciliter. White blood cell count is 17,310. Platelet count is 3.3 lakhs. Blood urea is 40.1 mg per dl. Serum creatinine is 0.46 mg per dl. CRP is positive. We had done a complete urine examination, taken the sample from the catheter cell.
Okay.
which showed pus cells of 10 to 12 cells per hypophil, epithelial cells 2 to 3 cells per hypophil. Albumin is nil and sugar is nil, sir.
Okay.
And we
So
did it,
what do you think about the urine routine?
sir. There is pyuria is there, sir. Presence of more than 5 in a centrifuge sample or more than 10 in a uncentrifuge sample is significant of pyuria, sir.
This is a centrifuge sample.
Sir,
This is a centrifuge sample or uncentrifuge sample?
this is here is anything more than 5. Here it is 10 to 12, no, sir. Significance.
Yeah. This is a centrifuge sample on, because a lot of labs does uncentrifuge.
Okay.
So you have to find out that, okay,
Okay.
because that will depend on that. Okay. Anyway, it's not a very severe pyuria like coming from pyonephrosis or anything like that.
Okay, sir.
I mean, there is, okay, fine. Carry on. And another thing also, like in many, when you have a viral fever, there's a generalized inflammation. And sometimes you do get, a little increase in the pus cells, which necessarily may not mean that that is a infection. So you have to go by the urine culture. And this is a catheter specimen, isn't it?
Yes, sir. It's a catheter specimen, sir.
Okay, great. Carry on.
So we done a urine culture and sensitivity. The organism, it was positive for the organism E. coli, Escherichia coli, sir.
Okay.
And the counts were 10 to the power of 5 colony-forming units per ml, sir.
Good.
It is significant in this child.
Yes. Carry on.
So after as a urine,
Okay, before we move on, let me ask you, what's your opinion on blood urea of 40.1 with a creatinine of 0.46?
sir, it is normal in this child, sir.
40 blood urea?
Like we
9
consider
months.
serum creatine.
Serum creatinine is normal, I agree. How
Yes,
about
sir.
blood urea?
It is actually normal 18 to 20, sir. It is slightly elevated in this child.
So what does that tell you?
Some dehydration.
Yes, exactly. Okay, great. Carry on.
So as the culture showed organisms, sir, we have given a child intravenous antibiotics, admitted the child, and we have put her on intravenous antibiotics. Sir. Then after we have taken a ultrasound kidney ureter bladder, urinary bladder,
Okay.
where it showed bilateral mild hydroerythronephrosis with mild cystitis changes, sir. The dilatation is like APD is 10 mm on the right side and 8 mm on the left side, sir. And the bilateral ureter is dilated, sir.
How much?
Sir, ureter on the right side it is 8 mm, sir. On the left side it is 7 mm, sir.
Okay.
According to the ultrasound reports.
Okay, fine. And bladder?
Bladder, it is distended with internal echoes, and the wall is thickened, sir.
How much?
As actually in the scan it was not mentioned, sir. Actually greater than 3 mm is significant.
Yeah, it's greater than 3 mm in a distended bladder, or 5 mm in a collapsed bladder. But then, I mean, that's important. That's something which you have to find out, because if you find a thickened bladder, what does that tell you?
So it is cystitis changes. There is inflammation and edema of the bladder walls.
Maybe. Other than that?
In case of a neurogenic bladder, there may be.
No, in this particular case, that it may be a chronic problem.
Okay.
Okay, because it takes some time for the bladder to get thickened. So that is something, again, we'll have to go back and check in the history. Anyway, okay, carry on.
So then
what else is something which you have to mention here? Oh, you should have told the ultrasoundologist to look for carefully. 9-month-old child presenting suddenly with UTI, no previous history.
Any bladder masses?
Here, what does the ultrasound tell you? Where is the problem here?
Sir, it is bilateral hydronephrosis, sir.
No, that I agree. So where is the problem?
It is in the bladder, sir.
Bladder outlet, right?
Yes.
So because it's bilateral, probably is a bladder outlet problem, because that will affect both the sides. So what else can it be? Bladder outlet. It's a female, so it cannot be posterior.
Yes, sir.
What is the other thing that can be? Maybe a stone. I don't know whether you are in a stone belt or not. 9 months is a little too early, but we have seen stones in smaller age groups, especially if it's a stone belt area. Like when I was in Ludhiana in Punjab, I mean, we used to see even, smaller children coming with stones. So that's a possibility, which, ultrasonologists usually may not look for it. But the problem is the child will be moving and crying, and then stone keeps moving. and they tend to miss it. So unless until you tell them, they may not look for it. Anyway, carry on.
Sir, after the ultrasound report, we have done a micturating cystoerythrogram, sir,
Great.
after
Okay.
control of the urinary tract infection.
Okay. Good. What does it tell you?
Sir, here there are two films, sir. One is the anterior-posterior film, another is the oblique film. So, in oblique film, the urethra appears normal, the bladder is appears normal, outline is regular. There is bilateral grade 5 vesico-ureteric reflex present, sir.
Does the bladder appear really normal?
Outline appears regular.
Margin appears regular. What is pear-shaped bladder?
In case of
Is
it's
it
a
one
over
form of,
distended.
not over distended. It's in a neurogenic bladder. You have seen pear, no, like that.
Okay.
I mean, the fruit, pear fruit. So that's what sometimes you get something like this sort of a shape. I'm not saying it is that, but there's something which you have to. Because normally in a child, especially in a female child, you get a round bladder.
Okay.
Okay, this is not a round bladder; it's more of an oblong or a elongated thing. So anyway, we'll keep that in mind. And again, lower down, what do you see? The oblique film.
Urethra, sir, or
Yeah.
there is a,
What about the urethra? In a female, you don't have much length
yes,
of urethra, but whatever you can see is what?
appear mild dilated in the oblique film.
Yes. Right. So what is that tell you? What is something which we should have asked in the history and looked in the examination? What is another possibility? It rarely occurs in females, but I have seen cases. It's called a mater stenosis
Okay.
in female, and sometimes the urethra, is a little more anterior. It is not hypospadias; it is opposite of that. So it comes right up to the little on the clitoris. So the history they give is when the child pees, the urine goes straight like in a male child. That's what usually the mother say. If it's sitting in a commode, it goes out of the commode. So if there's a metal stenosis, it's just like if you're closing the nozzle or something, you get a jet. So that is something within the history you'll have to look at, and if you're planning a cystoscopy something, that's the time you can confirm it or rule out. Okay, next. Carry on.
So after this, we have done a radionucleotide scanning, sir.
Okay.
So
Which
it's a
scan?
DMSA scan.
Okay.
Here we have given a dimercaptosuccinic acid scan.
Yeah.
Here scan is the camera is placed posteriorly, we're talking from posterior. Here the kidney size is little small. Bilateral, there is small kidney, and there is a small defect present on superior lateral aspect on the right side, sir. With slightly dilated ureters.
Okay. That DMSA scan you can't say. DTP you'll be able to say the ureter,
yes,
but DMSA is static renogram, so
yes,
ureter may not be very visible.
okay. The report says that left side there is a small size left kidney which is showing maintained cortical outline.
Okay.
The cortical extraction of the tracer is mildly impaired. Distribution of tracer within the cortex is uniform. The no local, linear or wedge-shaped defect is present. The dilated ureter is faintly visualized. The relative function is 50%. On the right side, there is a small sized right kidney showing maintained cortical outline. The cortical extraction of the tracer is mildly impaired. The distribution of the tracer within the cortex is uniform except for small cortical defect that is present in the superior lateral aspects. The dilated ureter is faintly visualized. Relative function is 50%.
Okay. How long after the infection was this DMSA taken?
This was taken 1 month after the UTI episode.
At that point of time, before taking, you had checked the urine to make sure there's no
before
infection.
this urine, before doing MC, usually we check for culture, so it was negative. And even while doing DMSA also, the urine examination appeared normal. Sir.
Normal. Okay. So now, okay, carry on.
That's the only investigation we have done. Sir.
Okay, so you have a 9-month-old child with bilateral grade 5 reflux, which is acute onset as far as history is concerned, with renal scarring. So definitely that history is not reliable, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Because you can't get a renal scarring in 5 days with a small contracted kidney in 5 days,
Yes, sir.
isn't it? So there's something, I mean, we can't rely on that history that much. Okay. So this is a congenital problem, most probably. It's been going on, and the mother noticed the UTI now only. I mean, that's what child might have had multiple episodes of UTI before, which went unnoticed.
Yeah.
They might have treated as, upper respiratory tract infection or whatever. And while it was a UTI. Okay, that's only will fit in everything together. Okay, now how are you going to manage this?
Sir, it's a child with bilateral grade 5 primary vesico-electric reflex. It is 9 months female child, sir, with a small renal scar. As the age of the child is less than 1 year, we consider this child for continuous antibiotic prophylaxis with antibiotic, whether cotrimoxazole or it is trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole combination,
Okay.
or nitrofurantoin, sir.
Okay. Now, which will you choose between these two, and why?
Sir, nitrofurantoin I'll choose, sir, which is
Why?
more of urinary, which have less serum concentration with more urinary concentration.
Okay.
Here we use half to 1/4 dose, nighttime, preferably nighttime dosage. Nighttime dosage in a toilet train. Otherwise, in an infant, we will do a BD dosage, sir.
Okay. Agreed. But the problem in the child with nitrofurantoin is, at least in India now, the syrup is not available. It's a very bitter
Bad
tablet.
taste will be this.
So the compliance may be not that perfect. So, I mean, I agree with your logic of using nitrofurantoin because sulfamethoxazole and trimethoprim may produce resistance to all sulfa drugs later on. So you can try that, but you have to make sure the compliance is there and the child is not getting recurrent UTI without mother knowing it. Okay. So then how long will you wait?
Actually, while
Tell me.
putting the child on continuous antibiotic prophylaxis, I will ask the mother to note down any fever associated with urinary infections, which is supposed to be a breakthrough UTIs. Take a note of those breakthrough UTI infections. So if otherwise there are no breakthrough infection, again we will repeat ultrasound 6 months after, and we will see whether we are progressing or not, sir.
How do you know? How do you know that you are progressing?
Sir, it's a hydronephrosis and the rate of dilatation is increasing or not. And also in such a huge grades may not resolute.
That's right.
Yes.
So ultrasound may not give you much of an idea. And also the ultrasound, like we in Amrita, we routinely tell them to do an ultrasound with empty bladder because reflux is, we cannot diagnose. I mean, I don't believe we can really assess reflux with ultrasound. Because when the bladder is full, the dilatation will be more. So if the amount of, the more the bladder is full, the more dilatation you will find. So that is erratic that way. But if you check the bladder on empty bladder, in an empty bladder, we always ask for an ultrasound KUB on empty bladder because if you find the pelvic dilatation is decreasing on empty bladder, the empty bladder means every time we are checking the dilatation, the constant, what you call condition, where the bladder pressure is 0. And then if you find APD is decreasing, then that has a point in, like when you're following it of hydronephrosis, PUJ or obstructive aorta, etc. But VUR, I'm not very convinced. So what else can you do?
Sir, we'll follow up the child to see for any breakthrough UTI, sir.
Okay, there's no
Even though
breakthrough.
after 1 year, we can, as the grade of the reflex is very high to resolute.
Okay.
So I'll go for a endoscopic management. Even on grade 5, endoscopic management is also less success rate. We'll do a open surgery, sir.
No, how will you decide? You started on
Yes,
antibiotic prophylaxis.
Yes, sir.
And child is going on. What will you tell the mother? How long are you going to follow this prophylaxis? Child is not getting any breakthrough infection.
Sir,
What are the other advices, Sukumar?
So to put a diary and note about the breakthrough UTI.
Okay, there is no breakthrough.
The
Mother
child is
does not.
constipated. To prevent constipation.
No, there is no constipation. You said there is no history of constipation.
Yes, Future
So
also.
how long? The mother is going to ask you, doctor, how long will I have to give this medicine?
Sir, actually, according to the IAP guidelines, if it is a more severe reflex, in case of more, we can give antibiotic prophylaxis up to 5 years. Actually, for the
So how do you know that child's kidneys are not getting damaged? That's the point.
we will do a annual DMSA scan to note any new scars, sir.
Okay, fine. I mean that is quite acceptable, but I mean what I do is depending, like in a child like this where the blood urea is already slightly high, even if it is dehydration, it shouldn't go up to that much, and there's already a renal scars, and the kidney is already contracted. So in that case, it's a case like this where there is a obvious anatomical damage that is being manifested. I will prefer to do DMSA every 6 months.
Okay.
Okay, and MCU every 1 year. So I do DMSA after 6 months and find that there is no increase in scars, everything is fine. I wait for another 6 months and then I do an MCU.
Okay.
So I'll know the reflux is increasing or decreasing. If it is decreasing, I continue that management. If there is no decrease at all, or if the DMSA shows increase in scars in spite of all this, then I can tell the mother, see, look, by waiting, we are only damaging the kidney more. So we have to go for surgery. Okay, that's what I follow. I mean, of course, every place will have its own, protocol. So you can go by your protocol. I mean, it's quite acceptable. But then the risk is this. In a mother like this, kidney partly damaged, like next time when they come after 1 year, you do a DMSA and the kidney function is deteriorated tremendously, then you can't get it back. And then it will be difficult to explain to the parents why you waited on the child. Okay. So what is the other management that you have? You said endoscopic management, which may not be very, very advisable here at this thing, although I am sure everyone agree with that. But in my practice, I mean, grade 4, grade 5 reflux I find it is just waste of money.
Okay.
What else? You said open surgery. What surgery are you going to do?
Sir, regularly now, sir, we'll do a bilateral ureteric reimplantation, sir.
Okay, before that, okay, bilateral. Okay, what are your options? Let's just look at that. What are your options in viscouretic reflux, like this grade 5 gross reflux?
Grade 5 first is observations in less than 1 year.
Fine.
We
Agree.
can do that. Next,
I'm
after
talking
that,
about
surgical sir,
options,
we can have a open reimplantation or vesicoscopic vesicoscopic reimplantation.
You can do other than open reimplantation. Okay, we'll come to the types of open reimplantation later on. But other than that, what else? There's a grossly dilated ureter. I didn't see a post-void film in that MCU. I'm sure you would have taken it. If the post-void films show significant amount of ureter, if the entire ureter is still visualized in the post-void film, what does that mean?
It's a severe reflex.
Less than 1 year, repeated UTI, dilated ureters. Any other option, Sukumar?
In the grossly dilated ureters.
Okay, you are working in a very peripheral place. Okay,
Okay.
Somewhere up north in some jungle, and there's what will you do to this patient? There is no. I mean, they are coming from 100 kilometers away. Not very educated parents. What will be your option then? What is the problem with reimplantation at this stage in this dilatation? I do reimplantation. I'm not.
Sir,
because
I
it
want
is
to, when the ureter is very dilated,
okay,
it is difficult to reimplant, sir.
Why it is difficult to reimplant?
Because actually to do a reimplantation, we have to achieve the Paquin's rule, which is the 1:5:1, where the length must be 5 times more than the diameter of the ureter, which can be achieved in a small bladder. Sir.
Why not?
So, because bladder size will be very less in this compared to this age, bladder size will be.
So how do you?
So we can when we can decompress like doing a ureterostomy to decrease the size.
So that's fine. And that's what I was coming to. Because ureterostomy or a vesicostomy is a similar procedure if the parents are not very educated and coming from periphery. But once you're done a ureterostomy, fine. You don't have to bother about infections. You tell them to come back after 6 months when everything is subsided. You can think of reimplant. we will come to ureterostomy in a little while, but since we are on reimplantation, how will you neutralize for this small bladder? I do reimplantation. I rarely do ureterostomies, very rarely, unless it is a neurogenic bladder coming to me in a small age, where there's no point in doing a reimplantation there, it is surely going to fail. So other than that, in other cases, if it's not a neurogenic bladder, I prefer to do a reimplantation. And our results, we have reviewed our results, is not worse or is worse from the other older children. So what are your techniques you have in a case like this? Large, small bladder, large ureter.
Sir, in this age group or after 1 year, sir?
No, this any age group.
Okay.
So
we
small
can
age is a
taper
problem because the bladder is small there.
During reimplantation, we can taper the ureter.
How?
There are two types of tapering, sir. One is where there is excisional tapering can be done, sir.
Okay, fine.
One more is stars plication and calcinesis folding, sir.
Calcinesis, okay. What else? Okay, you're right. Calcinesis is one, and then what is the other one?
Stars plication.
Star plication. Okay. So when you do that, you are reducing the ureter. You are reducing the diameter of the ureter. So you get length. To get length, what else will you do? Say you are doing a Cohen reimplantation.
Yes, sir.
So what else can you do to gain extra submucosal tunnel? You can reroute it. You know, I mean, you combine Cohen's with polytunnel Leadbetter sort of thing. So you take it out of the normal orifice, come a little above, and then come down like a Cohen.
Okay.
So you can get about another 1 or 2 centimeters extra length with that.
Okay.
Okay. So here, when I do that, I always put in a DJ stent. I mean, that's again specific to one department or one institution, but you can have your own. Some people don't use stents, but I feel more comfortable with the stent. Okay. What else? What are the other types of reimplantation?
So we can classify reimplantations into extravesical, intravesical, and combined approaches. Sir.
Okay.
In extravesical, it is Lich-Kruger techniques.
Wait, intravesical. We are talking
intravesical. It's a Cohen's cross-trigonal ureteric reimplantation. Another is polytunnel Leadbetter reimplantation.
What is polytunnel Leadbetter?
So here we'll create a new muscular hiatus superior to the regular hiatus. Then we take over the ureter from there, and we again create a mucosal hiatus at the regular ureteric opening. If the length of the tunnel is little less, we can go lower down to the bladder neck on the same side.
What is that called?
Sir, it's a suprahiatal.
No, that's called modified. The original polytunnel Leadbetter surgery, it was placed at the normal hiatus.
Normal ureteric.
We later modified it and advanced it more towards a trigon.
Okay.
Who is polytunnel? Anyway, I'm not going to reduce marks for that. And who is Leadbetter? There are two people. One was in Europe, and Polytunnel was in Europe. Leadbetter was in States, and they published the same technique at the same time.
Okay.
So that's why they are called Polytunnel Leadbetter. Anyway, that's beside the point. Okay, what else? What are the other
technique
types?
Is Glenn Anderson technique, sir.
Glenn
Where
Anderson.
it is a ureteral advancement technique.
Okay.
Where the ureter is the same muscular hiatus, we will advance the ureter lower down to the bladder neck, sir. And create a new mucosal hiatus. Create a submucosal tunnel and create a new mucosal hiatus.
Right. Then
another technique is Gill-Bennett technique, sir.
What is Gill-Bennett?
So Gill-Bennett, we will we'll get the two ureters in the midline, sir.
Okay, you make an incision, vertical incision between the two ureteric orifices. No, vertical, sorry, transverse incision, and then close it vertically.
Yes.
And take a stitch through both the ureters. Is it being done now?
No.
No, because what people have found that later on when you do cystoscopy, the ureters have gone back to the normal position. The nature always takes over and the reflux comes back. Yes. Okay, what else?
So
what is the other one?
Technique is the vesicoscopic technique, sir.
Yeah, that's okay. That's only a difference in the approach. But we are doing the same Cohen's repair, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, what else? What is extravesical repair?
Extravesical is Lich-Kruger technique. Sir.
Okay, right. So how do you do that?
So Lich-Kruger technique will go extravesically, and here we incise the detrusor superolateral to the regular ureteral hiatus and
Mhm.
upper 5 centimeters, and also extended incision 2 to 3 mm just below the intravesical junction. And we mobilize the ureter at the intravesical junction, and we place the ureter in the hitch that is created through the detrusor incision, and we start suturing with the detrusor muscle, so that the new hiatus will be little superior lateral to the.
Okay. So what is
So thereby
what
creating the we are increasing the tunnels,
right?
submucosal tunnel of the ureter.
So what are the 1 or 2 things that you'll keep in mind when you're doing it?
So when you are doing a extravesical reimplantation, whenever it is we do a bilateral vesical extravesical reimplantation, you have to be there is more chances of urinary retentions problem due to
There's
the injury to
a
the
chance
plexus,
of getting a neurogenic bladder.
bladders.
So how will you try to say, I don't do bilateral, but if you're doing for unilateral, some people do unilateral, or extravesical. So what is the precaution that you take?
While dissecting at the uretrovesical junction, you must to stay close to the ureters.
That is one. Now people don't go, like you said, you go 1 centimeter distal to the ureteric orifice. Okay. And those days, earlier, that is what was recommended. So you go distal and then move the ureteric orifice more towards the trigon. But that is given up now. So you just go around the ureter, just, if suppose this is the ureter, you just go around it and then bury it. Because the reason is the plexus is supposed to lie dorsal and medial to the
uretrovesical junction.
So if you extend the incision dorsally, so that means you are going to damage the plexus. So that's the reason why we have given up that. But anyway, I mean, I do it. I used to do quite a lot of extravesical earlier, but now that we are more comfortable with viscoscopic, we are sort of stopped doing it. Unless and until the only advantage of extravesical is that the patient can go home next day.
Okay.
Well, a viscoscopic, we have to keep them for 48 to 72 hours. So that's an advantage. But the disadvantage is the recurrence rate is a little higher compared to Cohen if you're doing a extravesical. Okay. Okay, let's come to ureterostomies now. So what are the types of ureterostomy? What ureterostomy will do in this case?
Sir, we will do a loop ureterostomy. Actually, we have to see that the bladder is cycled, sir.
Yes.
The urine.
So
it may be we'll do a loop ureterostomy, sir.
Bilateral loop ureterostomy?
Bilateral, unilateral we'll do, sir. We see which side the reflex is greater. That side we will do a loop ureterostomy.
Okay, good. So the urine will come from the opposite side and reflects back through the ureterostomy side. That's what you mean, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What are the other things available?
You can do a end ureterostomy or Sober's Y ureterostomy, sir.
Why will you prefer end ureterostomy? I mean, why should somebody prefer end ureterostomy here?
It gives good decompression of the system, sir.
Okay, one is good decompression. Secondly, in this case, most probably we'll need a reimplantation.
Yes.
So if you have disconnected it and then you can go. But then what is the problem with that? It's a little bigger surgery, right? When you have to disconnect, you have to, and later on when you have to go reimplant, there's a lot of fibrosis in that area.
Okay.
So it's not something which is worth the trouble. Which you can easily manage with a loop ureterostomy, and as you said, you can get a black cycle. Sobers you can do. What's the problem with Sober?
It's a high diversion, sir.
High diversion. So what is the problem with that? Why Sober's ureterostomy? When I was doing my MCH in 80s, that even then it was not very favored one, but people were doing it. But then I don't think these days many people do Sobers. What's the reason?
Because more high diversion.
Yeah, high
doing
diversion
a reimplantation.
Reimplantation, what's the problem? It is safer than loop, because when you're doing a loop, there is if you are not very careful not to divide that marginal vessels that go along the ureter, then you may create, and if you dissect the ureter too much when you're doing the ureterostomy, if you dissect it more towards bladder, to get the ureter out, then when you are disconnecting it to close the ureterostomy, you may land up devascularizing the distal part. That's the risk that you are taking over there. But in a Sober, that is not there, because that supply is coming from the renal artery.
Yes.
Higher up.
Yes.
Upper third of ureter.
Yeah.
renal artery.
So that is it. But why is the problem with that? The problem with that is I still get sometimes, especially done by adult urologist and all this Sober's thing. When you do an MCU, you always find that the dye reaches the bladder straight away, even before it comes out through the Sober's ureterostomy. The dye reaches the bladder first. Only after the bladder is full, then the dye start coming out through the ureterostomy side. So which eventually it means is every time the child is pee, then this urine is going up and it carries the infected, because that particular part of the ureter where you have done the Sober is colonized by bacteria, and that get carried up to the pelvis. So you are trying to give rest to the kidney, or you're trying to lower the pressure in the kidney pelvis, which actually doesn't occur much. It may be lowering to some extent, I'm not saying no, but then the risk is like a nephrostomy. The infection is quite near that. So that's the reason, and plus it's a little bigger surgery. So that's the reason why many people are not doing it now. Okay, then.
Sir.
Okay, so what are you going to do? You have done a say Cohen repair in this. What will you tell the parents? What is the follow-up?
Sir, initially we'll ask the child to come 4 to 6 weeks. Sir.
Okay.
So if the stents are placed, we will remove the stents. Sir.
Stents. Okay, fine.
Sir.
Agreed.
And then we do a ultrasound at 4 to 6 weeks to see for any early obstruction. Sir.
Okay. So ultrasound will always show a dilated ureter, because the ureters are grossly dilated.
Then
And
I will
once you remove this, sorry.
Yes, sir.
Once you remove the stent, then they may show a dilatation.
Yes.
So what will you do?
Then at 3 to 6 months, I will repeat a MCUG, sir.
Okay.
Then see for any.
Suppose there is no reflux. You have done a wonderful surgery. There is no reflux.
Sometimes
What
there
is the
may
next?
be.
Sorry.
We will put it on. We'll put the child on antibiotic prophylaxis, sir, till all the reflexes come down.
No, reflexes come down. You have done a MC after 6 months. There is no reflex. What will you tell? What will you do next?
So yearly, then I will monitor yearly, sir. Annual examination.
How do you know there is no obstruction there? You have
Sir.
plicated the ureter. You have put a stent. You have removed the stent now.
Yes, sir.
Ultrasound shows the dilatation is persisting, which will occur even if there is no obstruction.
Yes, sir. There is
So how will you
obstruction.
make
There
out
is progressive hydroureteronephrosis will be there, sir. But on MCU there will not be any reflex, sir.
That's right. So how will you rule out the reflex? How will you rule out an obstruction? It's not very common to get an obstruction. Maybe 10 to 15% of, even less than that, may land up in an obstruction after plication. So if you are doing a normal ureter, it is even less than that. Unless and until, what are the causes for obstruction?
It may be ureteral stenosis of the submucosal ureter, or there may be a kinking at the entry point.
No, wait a minute. Let's take one by one.
Yes, sir.
So what is the reason for submucosal stenosis?
There may be ischemia of the ureter.
Right. So how will you make sure there is no ischemia during surgery?
So mobilization, sir.
Okay, you have to mobilize it carefully. Then
and when we are putting in the submucosal, see that the tunnel size is very good to accommodate the ureter, sir.
Okay. Apart from that, make sure that the edges are bleeding.
Okay.
When you trim the ureter at the tip, make sure it is bleeding.
Okay.
Right? Some people even use, like I was attending one conference in Europe and they said they use the ICG, indocyanine green.
Okay.
You inject that and then look through the scope near infrared, and then if you find that it is going, it's lighting up, that means, I think it's little expensive for us and maybe it's a little overkill. Because the dye costs about 2,500 rupees. Plus you need that whole, near infrared scope, which is available with stores as well as with Wolf now, not Wolf, Striker. Now, if you have that laparoscope with that, then you can just hold it and see. But anyway, I don't know. But if the edges, if you cut the tip, if it is bleeding, fine, you are safe. If it is not bleeding, you have to mobilize further, cut again till it bleeds. Okay, what else? So you have made sure the thing is wide enough and there is no kinking, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So how will you you have to make sure investigation wise that there is no obstruction. There is no late, ischemia that's set in later on producing a stenosis.
So
I do a DTPA.
Yes, in ultrasound, after seeing hydroelectronephrosis, I will do a DTPA scan to
Yeah, you do a DTPA. What is a special thing you do when you do DTPA?
Renogram, we'll do diuretic renograms. We'll give a last.
That's fine. That's
Yes, sir.
DTPA.
Yes, sir.
What will you do? What is the special thing you do when you do DTPA? You have to put in a catheter.
Okay, sir.
A catheter in the bladder, it should be on drainage, because if the bladder gets full, because normally when you do DTPA, you ask the child to drink a lot of water.
Water, dehydrate the child.
We have to hydrate the problem, which means the bladder, by the time they do it, by the time the bladder is usually full, and there is an increase in the bladder pressure, you may get a hold up in the ureter, which may be just functional.
Yes, sir.
So because of that, you always catheterize the patient, connect it to your bag, and put it on drainage while you are doing the DTPA. Because that's what our protocol. We do it. So we do MCU, and MCU there is no reflex. We routinely do a DTPA. We don't rely much on the ultrasound. For another reason, again, I said it varies from institution. I am working in a private institution. If tomorrow they have a DTPA, I mean, if they find an obstruction, then I'll be sued for negligence. So that is one of the reasons why we want to make sure that we have evidence to show that when the child went out of our hand, the child did not have obstruction. So that's one of the reasons. So it's not a must. If you are comfortable, like you're doing an ultrasound and you find that ureters are not dilated at all. And again, a normal ureter, when you're doing a reimplant, there's a very rare chance, about 2%, 3% chance of getting a stricture or getting a stenosis. So, or maybe, so in those cases, you can go easily with the ultrasound. You do an ultrasound, then repeat the ultrasound after 6 months. There is no increasing dilatation, or there is no, a new onset dilatation. You're almost sure that there is no obstruction. But in an already dilated ureter is a problem, because ultrasound always will show dilatation.
Okay.
So there a DTPA may be a good option. Okay, what else will you tell the parents? What is the thing that you're scared of in this child? In long term.
There is a scar.
Yeah, there's a scar.
Sukumar scar. There is a scar.
Renal scar. We have to see.
What can happen to that?
Hypertension, sir. We have to monitor.
Yeah,
what will happen to the scar?
It may progress. Which is permanent scar, it will progress. It may result in hypertension.
Okay, child already has.
Monitor for hypertension, and any growth retardation we have to monitor, sir.
Yes. So hypertension is the one thing that you have to be really worried about this patient. And normally in a female child, this may, if it is not manifested early, it may manifest when she gets pregnant.
Okay.
About 30% of, I mean, that's what the literature shows, about 30% of these female children who had scars in the childhood develop hypertension during the pregnancy. Okay. And later on, about 10% of them go into end-stage renal disease. So that is a very, scary aspect. So we have to tell these parents about that, so that they will keep them on follow-up even after 18 they go out of our hands. And we have to tell them this is a problem. So normally what we have found in our follow-up, although it may not be in the books, is that if they don't have hypertension in the early infancy, then they tend to develop hypertension about 5 to 6 years of age. Okay. That's what we normally have seen. Now, I don't know how to document that, but that's what we normally see. So we tell them to come back at 5 to 6 years for a BP check. And then we check them, blood pressure and microalbuminuria in the urine during those periods.
Okay.
And then the next thing we have found is about puberty. That's the time they tend to get hypertension. Okay. I mean, this is just our study. I mean, I don't have any literature to prove that this is the time frames, but that's what we have normally seen. So that's what we advise. We tell them to come back at that time. And then when they come back at puberty, we tell them, see, now the next thing what we find is, normally people tend to get hypertension after 45. These people tend to get hypertension by 35. So I tell them, you check your BP once a year at least, when you reach the age 35, 45, and then go on. So that is a normal advice we give. What is another test that you can do? I already mentioned it. You can just check for urine albumin. That's a very simple test. Even the parents can do in the local lab. Doesn't have to come to institution. Check for urine albumin, and if they find the albuminuria is sitting in, that means your kidney is getting damaged. That is another simple test that you can do. Okay. Anything else? Dr. Narendra, anybody? Dr. Bhatnagar is there. Dr. Bhatnagar, you want to contribute something?
Dr. Bhatnagar, sir?
Dr. Bhatnagar, come and save me. Put in something more.
No. It's been a lovely discussion, and I think he's presented it well. He brought out all the salient features, and he's answered his your questions very bravely.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's good. I mean, the thing is that, when you talk about treatment strategies, I think there are two ways of looking at it. One is that it depends on the experience of the examiner, and the other is what is standard practice written in the books. And my advice to all postgraduates is that even though you may have seen your professors do it in a slightly different way, as far as the exam is concerned, you stick to what the Bible says.
Exactly, agree.
Yeah. For example, I mean,
Sir,
I've been reimplanting ureters even at 6 months of age. So I mean, it all depends on how you do and what you do.
Same here. I strongly believe the age shouldn't be a criteria for timing the reimplant. It should be the renal damage.
Yeah.
Renal damage is occurring. I have reimplanted even at 3 months.
Yeah.
I tell them there is a chance of failure. We may have to do another surgery, but it's better than spoiling the kidney.
Yeah. And as far as the the ratio between the tunnel and the diameter of the ureter is concerned, you can always tailor that. You can trim the ureter and tailor the ureter according to the size of the bladder. So that's not a problem. The other thing is that one thing which I am very fond of practicing is the use of imipramine. And imipramine works slightly better than oxybutynin in such cases, because in addition to relaxing the detrusor, it also has an action on the internal sphincter. So it works both ways to increase the capacity of the bladder. And if you combine imipramine with triple micturition, I think your problem is solved over a period of a month or so. And you have a fairly decent sized bladder to then reimplant the ureter.
The side effect of constipation also will be reduced, I think.
Yes.
Oxybutynin will produce constipation.
True.
Mixing with the...
There's a very high incidence of constipation in primary vesicular reflux anyways. So I think that is also something which must be looked into. And sometimes treating the constipation helps in the vesicular reflux also. So I think it's not widely written, but I think it should be part of practice to look for constipation, even if the child or the parents have not complained of constipation.
I use one thing I forgot. We didn't discuss is the use of alpha blockers. Now we use alpha blockers routinely on all these patients, and that has been. I mean, there are also literature evidence to show that it reduces or it hastens the resolution of reflux. So if you are treating conservatively, then we add on alpha blocker to them.
Yeah.
So the dose is about, for those students who doesn't know, the dose is you give a 0.02 milligram per kg as a single dose in your OPD, because for the first dose, rarely, we had only one incident so far, rarely you can get a hypotension. Very rarely. It's an alpha 1 blocker specific, so usually it doesn't produce a generalized vasodilatation. But still, it's safer to keep it in the OPD, give a test dose. If everything is fine, the child goes home. Then you increase it to 0.04 to 0.4 milligram. So it's a wide range, 0.04 to 0.4 milligram per kg per day, just single dose at night. And you start with 0.04, then increase it gradually depending on the phosphoid residue. So the phosphoid residue is going up. Of course, if it's a large reflux like this, you should allow, like in this case, it will be about 10-15 ml of pseudo residue will be there. But otherwise, if you can go by phosphoid residue, if the phosphoid residue is decreasing, you keep on increasing the dose of the alpha blocker 20% each time. Like if you are giving, some value, you add on another 20% to it and wait for another 2 weeks. Repeat the PVR, keep on increasing. At one point of time, as the reflux is subsiding, the PVR also will tend to come down and become static at one level. Then you can keep on that because you have to take, that is a pseudo residue. So that we have found that it decreases or increases the chance of resolution much, much higher. Because what it does is it relaxes trigon and the upper urethra. So the voiding pressure is less. When the voiding pressure comes down, naturally the reflux also resolves. So that is something which, this is in the textbooks. It is even in the Campbell. Our paper actually being quoted in the Campbell. It's all there are a lot of other literature. So you can safely say that.
But in the follow-up,
yeah.
Do you do an MCUG or DRCUG? What is your policy?
Yeah, good question. I was hoping that I wanted to mention that. And I was talking to somebody, about the higher resolution rate of Difflex in UK with Difflex. So I was talking to somebody there. They said before giving the Difflex, they do a normal MCU. But after giving the Difflex, they do a DRCU. So naturally, when you're doing a indirect MCU, then your chances of picking up the grade is very, very less. So you may think there's a resolution when it is not there. So I think if you want to do follow-up MCU, we should actually do a proper MCU. That's the only way. Otherwise, both should be indirect MCU.
Yeah.
If you want to do a study, you can't have the first thing before surgery in a direct MCU and after surgery indirect MCU. That is not logically acceptable.
No. We are talking about DRCG. DRCG is
DRC.
to do with the radionuclide.
Okay, fine. That is it. That you are injecting into the bladder.
Yeah.
But there the grading of reflux is not accurate there. Because you can just see something going up.
So essentially, in the post-operative period, if you've done a reimplantation or done whatever, you just want to know whether reflux has been treated or not.
Yeah, that's right. You can do that, but I don't know how much is it as sensitive as direct MCU. I don't know.
Yes, it is. It's quite a regular practice in AIIMS, so we are very happy with DRCG.
We have been doing proper MCU. MCU.
So what is
the only
issues
of radiation with regular?
Yeah,
MCU.
that's true. You have a point there. If we are comfortable with DRC, follow-up, I think that is better. I think we have done only 1 or 2 children so far, some VIP children who doesn't want to catheterize. So we did DRC. So that's fine. It's quite
for the initial diagnosis, the MCUG is advised for better anatomical delineation. Post-operative follow-up, DRCUG is advised. That is what the book says.
Yeah, fine. Yeah. It's quite acceptable. It's quite acceptable.
Yeah.
So what is your comment on progressing of the scars?
That's the thing. The scar has come, as your student said, it tends to progress a little bit. So I want the parents on that it may tend to progress, but then it doesn't progress that much as if you hadn't corrected the reflex. So what we go is like if before surgery, like we are following up the patient conservatively, and if there is a progression of scars, we have to take it that it is because of the reflex and infection rather than the normal contraction that occurs with the scar. You won't find new scars there. It's only the existing scars that become bad. But if you find new scars, if the reports say there are new scars developing in other areas, so that is definitely an indication for surgery.
So, you see, many years ago, we did a multi-center international study on the role of DMSA scans This was funded by the International Atomic Energy Agency. And we had concluded there, so that is something which is very important, that when you're doing your initial DMSA, you must make sure that there has been no urinary tract infection in the previous 6 months. Because if there has been something which even suggestive of a urinary tract infection or a pyelonephritis, then your DMSA may show up as a false positive. So that is something which you must be very careful about when you're doing a DMSA scan. Other than that, I think post-operatively, I think DMSA scans are a good thing to be done, at least for the first few years, at least once annually, to look for appearance of new scars. And if there are scars, then I wouldn't ask the patient to come back after a year to get the blood pressure monitored. I would ask him to go to his local general practitioner and get at least every 2 months or 3 months, he should get a blood pressure checked. And if the blood pressure shows an increase, then he should report immediately for further investigation and management. The other important issue with measuring blood pressure in children is the size of the cuff. So that is something which you must be very careful, that you measure the blood pressure with the appropriate size cuff. Because if you're using a small cuff, then you may end up falsely getting a high blood pressure reading.
Sir, your experience in the reflux in a duplex system?
Well, we have done, both viscoscopic reimplantation in Duplay, provided both the ureters are within the bladder. Otherwise, I tend to do it open, go extravesical, divide that, the upper ureter, and then do a tunnel. I was not very fond of ureterostomy, which is a very well acceptable procedure, and many people are doing it. But somewhere or other, I was a little hesitant to, the normal ureter over there is very small, and attaching this dilated ureter, which most of the time is infected or had infection, attaching it to that, I was a little, uncomfortable. So I've been doing a double barrel reimplantation in all these cases. But I think if somebody says I'll do a ureterostomy, I think it is acceptable.
It will all depend on what kind of duplex system you have. If the ureters, have combined below, and there's only one ureter in the bladder which is refluxing, then you can easily reimplant that ureter. But if both ureters are opening in the bladder and the refluxing ureter is very close proximity to the other normal non-refluxing ureter, the very act of dissecting that ureter may produce reflux in the normally inserted non-refluxing ureter as well. So if that is the situation, then I think both ureters need to be reimplanted at the same time. Possibly,
Common tunnel.
In the same tunnel as well. I mean, there are lots of people who would reimplant one ureter and put the other ureter as a ureterostomy. So, I mean, that is also something which is standard procedure. Lots of surgeons practice that. I mean, it all depends on what one is used to.
Sir, there are some questions to you, Mohan Abraham, sir.
Sure.
What is the role of urodynamics in vesicular cases?
Yeah. Ideally, all bilateral reflexes, which is primary, should have a UDS to rule out that it doesn't have a secondary cause. It's a blanket statement. But then in children, there have been papers which shows that if you take a careful history and a careful examination, we get as much information from that as we will get from the UDS. So that is the other side of the coin. So if you have in your history and in your examination, if you have a doubt, that you're dealing with a bladder, dysfunctional bladder, then I think UDS is warranted. Because the only thing you can document what you're dealing with, whether you're dealing with a detrusor hyperactivity, or you're dealing with a sphincter incontinence, or you're dealing with a detrusor sphincter dysenergy, which is the commonest what we find, you can document it and you can treat it accordingly. Because if it is DST, I mean, detrusor sphincter, when I use DST, people think it is, disorders of sexual differentiation. So
Detrusor sphincter.
yeah, detrusor sphincter dysenergy. Then the treatment what we give is alpha blockers, and it tend to regress very well. But if it is a hyperactivity, then we have to go for oxybutynin or imipramine, whatever your choice. So imipramine, I also give a lot of imipramine, but then I have to say that legally you are not as safe as giving oxybutynin, because imipramine can prolong the QT complex and can produce heart problems. So before we start, just for our own protection, we do a ECG and say that everything is normal. Then only we start on imipramine. But then imipramine, as he said, I find it more useful. Like, it relaxes bladder, contracts the sphincter. Child symptomatically become much better with imipramine than with oxybutynin. But this legal issue is that oxybutynin is considered safe, imipramine is not. So that is but otherwise, I mean, so the urodynamics will help you to differentiate between these two.
Can I make a comment on the role of urodynamics? See, we used to do a lot of urodynamic studies in lipoureteric reflux a long time back. What we realized was that we would get very false readings because of the reflux. You would never get a true picture of the bladder function. And B, the incidence of post-UDS urinary tract infections was very high. So we actually stopped doing pre-operatively urodynamic studies, and we realized that it is much better to do it post-operatively, not immediate post-operative, but at least a year after the reimplantation of the ureters, because that gives a true picture of the bladder function. And in any case, whatever the bladder function is, it is going to be treated with
your video is stuck, I think.
Yeah. So there is a comment in the chat box. The bladder appeared oblong, and is there any chance of myogenic failure in this case?
Not usually. Myogenic failure there's a chronic obstruction, and you have been treating with oxybutynin. Myogenic failure have been reported. We have literature on that. But this is too young to get a myogenic failure. 9 months of age is too young to get a myogenic failure. But these are the different configurations, like hourglass bladder, pear-shaped bladder. These are different configurations in neurogenic bladder that has been described. So that's why I brought it out. Sometimes you get a dumbbell-shaped bladder.
Yeah. There is one request in the chat box, sir. Can you explain in detail the rerouting? Dr. Swati has asked.
Yeah, sure. Rerouting is like,
that is to gain the extra length.
Extra length. Okay, so this is the bladder, right? And now here is the ureteric. Okay, here is a ureter coming in, and you're doing the Cohen by increasing the tunnel here. Now, what you do is you take out the ureter from that, and like you do in polytunnel Leadbetter, you bring it out a little superior to that. Then come down into the normal orifice, and then advance like a Cohen. So you get about 1 or 2 centimeters. Just you are combining actually polytunnel Leadbetter and Cohen.
Cohens.
The direction is that of Cohen's, cross trigonal, but rerouting is of polytunnel Leadbetter.
It's a combined procedure, both extravesical, intravesical.
No, intravesical, purely intravesical. Like in polytunnel, we don't go extravesical. I mean, you take the ureter extravesically, but you are not approaching is from the bladder side only.
Yeah.
See, UDS, the thing is, UDS is indicated. I mean, I don't do, UDS is Post-op is indicated if it is abnormal pre-op. So the problem of UDS, as he said, is it doesn't always give you anything, solid that will change your management plan. Because as I said, a careful history and an examination will tell you most of the time. But if you are planning to observe the patient, if you're planning to go on conservative management for a vascular-aortic reflux, especially bilateral, and you think the PVR is high, then you need to know whether there's actually a dysfunctional bladder or not. So that point, a UDS may be helpful. If you're planning to do surgery, then as you said, it may not have much, because anyway you're going to do surgery, so it doesn't matter.
There is one more question, sir, from Mohanavel.
Okay.
What is the role of IVP? When do you advise IVP?
It's a criminal. As far as the present knowledge and literature is concerned, it is criminal to do IVP in children.
Yeah.
That is a bottom line. But then always, I mean, we talk about radiation so much, but then nobody minds doing a CT urogram or a CT chest. It is 100 times more than what an IVP is incurring. But then people are not bothered. People do for appendicitis, people do abdomen X-ray. Recurrent abdominal pain, people go and do CT abdomen. So it is mainly thinking. What you think is a mindset rather than anything else. So if you think IVP is going to make a difference in your management, like sometimes like DTPA, we had this problem when we do DTPA. They will say there is obstruction at the VUJ, partial obstruction at the VUJ, partial hold up at the VUJ, but child's condition is deteriorating, the kidney function is deteriorating. You have to do something. So over there, if you do an IVU, the advantage is you can take much delay film. IVU, I mean DTPA, they usually do for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, not more than that. But in IVU, you can take 4-hour film, you can take even a 24-hour film. So in a 4-hour film, you find that like the opposite kidney is completely drained and the ureter is not visible. But on the affected side, the kidney and the ureter is still visible, loaded with dye. There is an obstruction. But then it has to be very selective. Only if you think that IVU is mandatory or necessary to make a diagnosis, you do it. That's all. And take very few films, not, like if you tell the radiologist to take, they will take multiple films. So in a case like that, if you are ruling out VUJ obstruction, you don't need 2 minutes, 5 minutes, or 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 20 minutes film. Because that is all meant for the kidney. We are not interested in that. We are interested in the VUJ. So what I tell them is you give dye, take a film at 20 minutes, take a film at 1 hour, 2 hour, and 4 hours. So you take 3 films, the exposure is much less, and you get the information what you want.
What is the best investigation to get the clear anatomy in duplex system? Is MR urogram helpful?
MR urogram with contrast will be the ideal thing to do.
Ideal for a duplex.
Yes, there's no radiation, and you can even reconstruct into a 3D this thing. So you can rotate around and see where exactly the ureter is getting implanted into the bladder. So MR urogram is the best. Only disadvantage is usually needs a GA for a child.
Any other questions or queries? Sir, there is a comment on this.
VVS, anything?
Chandrasekhar? Sir, there is a comment from Dr. Jindal, Chipmar. The original description of Politano lead butter is combined approach to avoid the risk of damage to the vas during rerouting. But over the time, people have started doing it complete intravesical. You got it, sir?
Yeah, I got it. I mean, yeah, that's true.
Dr.
I mean, Politano himself has, modified it later on. That's why I said, I mean, actually, I think 2 times it was modified. So this is the original what is said is that. Later it became intravesical, and later the meatus was advanced more into the tripod. So VVS, how are you?
In
Good, sir.
Sir, in post-op, for how long need to give oxybutynin from Dr. Charu?
Post-op, I don't give oxybutynin routinely unless until the patient has got a neurogenic component and there is a diffuser hyperactivity, which the patient will have to continue. If it's a neurogenic problem, you'll have to continue lifelong.
Yeah.
So depending on what you are giving, oxybutynin, I don't normally give oxybutynin empirically. Heighten I give till the reflux is resolved. Like even post-op, if I am giving, I'll till the next MCU shows the reflux has subsided. Then I taper it and stop it. You taper, you make it, like reduce it by 30% every time, and then stop it, or a period of 1 or 2 months.
VVS?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Hello.
Anything? Any comments on this?
Yeah, it was a nice discussion, sir. The case was presented very well, and Dr. Mohan Abraham was a real good examiner. No, I think few comments. One is the timing of the DMSA, as Dr. Bhatnagar has put it. I mean, in this case, the DMSA was done at the time of the very acute episode of infection. That's what I've understood.
4 weeks. 4 weeks.
4 weeks after.
4 weeks is a little short time. So we would not be able to say whether that photopenic area on the one side, whether it is a scar or a pyelonephritic focus.
Yeah, but then the other point is it's a contracted kidney. The kidney size is small.
That can be a hypodysplastic kidney directly because of the reflux itself. I mean,
Yeah.
So what part is dysplasia, what part is scar, what part is pyelonephritis, acute, very difficult to say. So I would probably repeat a DMSA after 6 months to check what exactly is happening, as Dr. Mohan has said. Secondly, I've had a reasonably, I can't say a great experience, but I generally don't prefer reimplanting before 1 year of age. That's a general, because of the small bladder. You may have to unnecessarily taper the ureters. Tapering the ureter is not a small thing. You should not be taking. Dr. Mohan Abraham, Dr. Bhatnagar might be able to do it, but then for a general, regular pediatric surgery, tapering the ureter is not a joke. You should not take it as a joke. So I would not be very comfortable reimplanting large ureters in a small bladder, at least till 1 year of age. That's been my policy. But for such cases like this, we have had some children where they were infants with reflux like this, grade 4, grade 5, who have had repeated UTIs despite prophylaxis. So they have had repeated breakthrough UTIs. That is when you are forced to do something about the reflux. Either you do a unilateral refluxing ureterostomy or a vesicostomy or a reimplantation. What I do is I try endoscopic injection in these patients. Some of these patients they agree, and we have tried in some of these patients, and it has really worked. What it actually does is it at least downgrades the reflux, even if it does not completely stop the reflux immediately. It downgrades the reflux, and then we continue the prophylaxis. Obviously, we don't stop the prophylaxis. And once we bring these children back after 1 or 1.5 years of age and then repeat, usually the reflux is either completely gone or significantly downgraded to grade 1 and 2, where you can just probably treat like a low-grade reflux. So some of these children have actually escaped the ureter reimplantation also. Sometimes you have to go back later and do a reimplantation. After 1.5, 2 years of age, you can comfortably do even a vesicoscopic reimplant, even if you have injected the dextran or hyaluronic acid before. That is one thing. I think if you have done injections, then you can consider endoscopic injection in these children, especially if they are infants with reflux like this, who have repeated breakthrough infections despite prophylaxis. Our first choice is to put them on prophylaxis and wait. But if they have repeated breakthrough infections, then I think one consideration can be given to endoscopic injection.
I think waiting is all right, provided the kidneys are not getting damaged. If your DMSA is showing deterioration, then I think it overrules everything else.
I think the management of reflux now, I just wanted to put this point actually when I was listening to discussion. This is mostly for juniors. The management of reflux previously 20, 25 years ago, there were, kind of rules like all grade 5s and grade 4s will be reimplanted. All grades 1, grade 2s will never not be done anything. Grade 3 is intermediate according to. But now I think the treatment of VUR is by risk stratification. So even if a child has grade 3 reflux, if the kidney is significantly damaged, then you have to treat it more aggressively. Aggressively, I mean surgically. Then wait and watch. Just because it's grade 3, you wait and watch and then put the child on low-dose antibiotics. There are some grade 5 refluxes which I have seen whose kidneys are absolutely normal. So you need not, in fact, I have a child from Srikakulam. I've been waiting for the past 3 years for an indication to operate on the child. He has bilateral grade 5 reflux. He presented to me with UTIs, grade 5 bilateral reflux. Bladder was a little small. He was a small child, 1.5 years. I gave some oxybutynin for some time, put him on prophylaxis. Never had a breakthrough infection for 3 years now. I mean, he should have come back last year. Every year he comes, we get an ultrasound, we get a DMSA, we get an MCUG. The reflux is persistent. I think I told him last time when he came that next visit he is going to come for a reimplantation because he is now 4 or 5 years old and his reflux is the same. But his kidneys have changed quick and span. So
no hurry in intervening.
Absolutely no. So that's what I'm trying to say. I think that it's a risk stratification that any child with reflux which is causing either repeated breakthrough infections or scarring. There is one other very interesting paper published from US. It's a very interesting paper where it says that the same grade of reflux, you have 2 children, the same age, same sex, same grade of reflux into the kidney. In one, the kidney is scarred at presentation itself. Like, the child presented with UTI, you treat it, you do a DMSA, there is reflux on MCU, DMSA, there is scarring. Other child, there is no scarring. Now, the chance of VUR spontaneously resolving in the child with scarring is much less than the spontaneous resolution in a child without scarring. So it's very important to do a baseline DMSA. If the child has significant scarring already at presentation, probably the child is going towards surgery earlier than later. I mean, surgery, you can do anything, injection, vesicoscopy, open reimplant, whatever, but more aggressive management of that type of reflux may be required. The other point, interesting question was about urodynamic studies in primary, the so-called primary VUR. Now, primary VUR is an enigma. It's a diagnosis of exclusion. Now, you have to rule out that the child does not have bladder dysfunction, either neurogenic or non-neurogenic. That is the only time you label the child as primary VUR. There were some very interesting studies done in primary VUR in young boys, infant boys, where they had a little bit of dilatation of posterior urethra. We keep seeing these children, and there is a postulation that these children probably had valves during pregnancy, during intrauterine life. Somehow the valve got disrupted during development, but the after effects of the valve in the form of reflux has remained. This is one explanation given to why high-grade vasochorotic reflux is much more common in male infants than female infants. I mean, the case we presented is a female infant, but it's actually an exception. Usually it's the male infants who have high-grade vasochorotic reflux presenting in infancy with antenatal hydronephrosis. So the question of urodynamics, the problem is you need to have a video urodynamic studies if you want to do urodynamics in a child with VUR, especially a high-grade VUR. Most of us do not have that. Of course, we are doing them, but the only thing is, even with that, how much information you are actually going to get, and Dr. Mohan has put it very correctly, that your good history, good physical examination, good ultrasound, good MCUG is going to probably give you as much information about the bladder function as a urodynamic study is going to give. So probably the role of urodynamics in a VUR, a primary VUR, so-called primary VUR, where the bladder looks reasonably normal by all other means, I don't think there is a role of subjecting these children to urodynamics, upfront before actually going for the surgery itself.
Sir, Dr. Mohan Abraham, sir.
Yep.
There is one question in the chat box. So what is the option if there is a stenosis following a Leadbetter Politano and also following a Cohen's.
Okay, that depends on two things. How long is the stenosis? Is it just a meatal stenosis because you have in sutured mucosa to mucosa, there is a stricture and stenosis, or you have in bevel, you spatulate the ureter well when you're doing it, or is it because of ischemia and there's a long segment of ureter within the canal, within the submucosal tunnel, maybe 1 or 2 centimeters of ureter is stenosed. So it depends on that. So what we can do is to do a retrograde study. I'm in polytunnel leadbetter is easy to do because ureter is in line. In vesicoscopic, what we do is many times we can assess through the urethra itself. If you reduce the bladder capacity, I mean, if you decompress the bladder, then the ureteric orifice comes more medially, and you may be able to do a retrograde. Otherwise, we just like do vesicoscopic port insertion. You just point the dilator and make a small incision and put a cystoscope through that. So thereby, you will be able to see the ureteric orifice and inject a little dye and see what is the anatomy like. If it's a long stricture, you may have to do a re-implant. Or if the ureter is very grossly dilated because of the obstruction, you can have even cut open the tunnel. You just cut open the tunnel, lay it bare, and if a reflux recurs, then you can go and re-implant at that time. But at least it will reduce the size of the ureter because you have let loose, you opened up the ureter. But if
So
it is
redo, which procedure you prefer? That's what he's asking.
Again, it depends on the length of the ureter that you are going to get. Like if this many times what we have done is you can combine it with just an extravesical repair. Open extravesical. After a reimplant, just do a small incision lateral to the rectus and then go to that area and bury it extravesically. So that will give you enough length if you have taken care of the strictured part. If it's a meatal stricture, just a meatal stricture, you can even incise it with a bug bee, open it up and put a stent. And you remove the stent after 2 months and then that would have opened up. So it all depends on how long the stricture is.
The intramural segment in the Cohen's, what you will do for that during redo?
Redo, we can, you mean to say when you are redoing it to relieve the obstruction or redoing it for the reimplant?
Redo for a reimplantation.
Then you have to discard that. See, before doing for the reimplant, normally we would have opened it up to relieve the obstruction. Now, if you are going to do upfront surgery, then just cut it open.
Yeah.
You have to cut it open, open it up, so the ureteric orifice will come to its original position. To the original position intravesically. So then you combine it with an extravesical procedure.
There is one more in the chat box, sir. How long you continue the prophylaxis after reimplantation? From Dr. Ratchet.
Till the MCU shows no reflux.
Shows that
there is no reflux. Like you do an MCU no reflux, we stop the prophylaxis. But MCU shows is downgraded, but say from grade 5 or it has come to grade 2, we continue the prophylaxis till the next MCU shows it has resolved.
I think the chat box questions is over, sir. So
anything else anybody wants to contribute?
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bhatnagar, and thank you, Dr. VVS. How is the student performance, sir?
Yeah, he was very good. He was really prepared. So it's very good. But if you want to get a gold medal, as I said, you should focus on getting on to one aspect. Anyway, even my PGs will like to thank you for starting this, this teaching sessions. Even my PGs have been appreciating it very well, and it's really good. Different faculties sharing their opinion, and it's a real learning experience for the postgraduates. I think you're doing a wonderful work. Thank you for that.
Thank you, sir.
I think that's something which the pandemic has taught us. I think our quality of teaching has become much better because there's inputs from so many learned people at the same time.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yes. Thank you very much, sir, for your valid
Okay, thank you.
comments.
So,
Thank you so much.
Thank
Looking
you, sir.
forward to next Wednesday.
Yeah,
which
thank
is
you,
what
sir.
is the next one?
Next one is Bhatnagar, sir, and
Very good. What is it?
topic is hepatobiliary. Probably liver mass or choledochal cyst.
Okay. Great.
That is on 9th, sir. 9th June.
Nice.
Yeah.
Dr.
Looking
Dr.
forward.
Narendra Kumar,
Yeah, yes, sir.
Will Murugan here
Yeah. Good evening, sir. Good evening.
from ICH, HOD ICH. See,
Yeah, I know.
I love the Dr. Mohan's and Dr. Bhatnagar's interaction, especially their views on infant reimplantation. I am a big votary of this particular. If you go to this particular index case, you've got a 9-month-old female child with a scar, a small kidney,
Bilateral.
yeah, and bilateral reflux and all. There's one thing missed on that MCU, which was not discussed, probably because of lack of time. There is, especially on the left, there is a secondary PEJ obstruction. That probably VUR with secondary PEJ obstruction was probably not discussed. That was a secondary PEJ obstruction. That is enough for me with all this in UTI, 9-month-old child, mild BP elevation, urea elevated. With all this, it's enough to reimplant the child. I agree with Dr. Bhatnagar or Dr. Mohan. They said that they would they have done as early as 3 months. I do as early as 5 months also. This particular child, there's a definite indication. Regarding the size of the bladder during reimplant, I've been doing it for 25 years. I even presented that in Delhi last time. And we have never had a problem with reimplanting in a small cell. I find reimplanting easier because you don't have to delve deep into the bladder trying to create some. I find doing a reimplantation difficult in children above 3 years. It is much more superficial to do to get the tunnel. And then if there are any PG still left on this group, on this discussion, they should understand renal growth. Nephrons do not actually keep on adding. New nephrons stop, are not added to the kidney after 7 years of age.
7 years.
It is 7 years. Not one single nephron is added. So the management of a child, smaller child, is different from a management of an older child. It is very much confused, especially in these American Association Urology recommendations and all that. The thing is that the maximum nephron addition is in the first 2 years of life. So our goal as pediatric surgeon is to maximize renal growth and to minimize renal scarring. So, if you have an infant with UTI, with a significant reflux, I wouldn't wait. I would rather operate. Okay, that is one. That is the point of view. And then as for renovascular hypertension, it was discussed. And as Dr. Mohan said, we do microalbuminuria and all that and repeated BP. I insist on a digital thing. Of course, I work in Chennai, both in the government and outside corporate. We have these digital things that I find is more appropriate stuff. A good BP will have a 6 sized cuff sizes. They come in ready-made 6 for each age group, for infant, for children less than 6 months, for 6 months to 1 year, and that. So you use the appropriate size cuff, you get a good digital record. But then how to predict which child will go to renovascular hypertension? Like I do regular PRA assessments following a reimplant, or if the kidney is small, I do plasma renin assays. It's not very costly. It costs 1,900 rupees at Child Trust. And I do it at least a year in all cases which are reimplanted. And it doesn't actually wait. I don't actually have to wait till puberty. Even after the reflux has settled, it comes even 5-6 years after surgery. By 5 to 7 years, we have quite a few cases with renovascular where the PRA went up, and then the PRA measurements it actually goes up even 6 months before the BP starts going up. So in these cases, you can actually preempt renovascular hypertension by giving the appropriate antihypertensive.
How long you do it, sir, yearly?
PRA, sir? I do
Till
it for
puberty?
Not puberty, till I hand it over to an adult nephrologist. I tell them at 15 years, right, finish. Now you have to go to the adult nephrologist, and quite a few of them, they are do this, what we call this transition urology. It is always important to them. I write on my file that please, at puberty, please avoid macroproteins. They have to have yearly PRA measurements, yearly microalbumin measurements, and all that. In these days of litigation, you don't know whether the child or the parent will, change their behavior at 18 years and try to, take out their frustrations on us at the fag end of our careers. So I would always, I always do PRA measurements on my reimplanted. As for this alpha-1 blockers, Sir said, Mohan Abraham Sir said that he uses it for a lot of these cases. I think they are useful, my personal experience, only in DSDs, sphincter dyssynergia. When you have a sphincter dyssynergia, an alpha-1 blocker might be useful. If you don't have that, it actually increases the diameter of the uretrovesical junction and can worsen a reflux if you don't have DSD. That is my opinion.
It relaxes the ureter, so the ureteric diameter may slightly go up, not grossly, but maybe 1 or 2 millimeters. So that you have to take into account when you're doing the ultrasound. But what it does is it relaxes the sphincter, so the voiding pressure becomes less. So the amount of reflux also become less. So that's why it, there are so many papers on it. It's just not mine. There are so many papers to show that
damage also will be reduced.
Yeah, damage also will be reduced. So that's why
it's just a point of view, sir. Right?
Dr. Velmurugan, have you published your results on PRA?
No, sir. See, PRA, you want me to publish, sir, because
I think you should publish, because Bajpayee's paper is there. Bajpayee's paper is there. I was looking up, because my oration is coming and that is on, I'm planning to give it on VUR. So I was looking up, is there any other corroborative evidence to say that? I couldn't find any paper. In fact,
sir, so it's very easy. At least I do PRA measurements and all my cases done though I am in the government, in the afternoon I'm at Child Stress November. From there, it's very easy to pick up these case sheets. Everything is digitalized.
Yeah, so why don't you publish it?
On 2000, I will get it for you. At least I know of 12 to 13 children with elevated PRA have been put on preemptive drugs by the pediatric nephrologist there.
So why you should publish it? There will be a good paper from India, because there isn't any other paper I could see. Only paper I could see is saying that PRA is not related to this thing, reflux.
I started doing it in 2006-7. Only Lister was doing. One lab was doing it in Chennai. It was pretty expensive then, 3,300 or 3,500 in 2006 and 7 was pretty expensive to patients. Not everybody could do it, or somebody will tell them no, it's not necessary. But anyway, now at least the rates have come. All my children undergo.
How much do they charge now?
1,900 at Child Stress.
Yeah, I think that's not much these days.
Yeah, simple, sir. Maybe it has come down also.
Velmurugan.
Yeah.
See, one small query. Suppose the child, you have reimplanted the child, and then the child is non-hypertensive, he's normotensive. When you measure the BP, it's normal. The PRA is increased.
The BP is normal. The PRA is increased post-surgery.
Post-surgery.
You'll have to send them to a pediatric nephrologist and start off.
I send all my VURs post-surgery to pediatric nephrologists, whether without PRA or with PRA.
No.
Right. But what I'm trying to say is, so in spite of the child not being hypertensive, just with PRA raised, do you put them on antihypertensives?
It is, you have this renal antihypertensive, right? There's a big group of them. No, the pediatric nephrologist I work with, there are two people. One is an AB pediatric nephrologist, Dr. Saira. He is little hesitant to start in the circumstances which you mentioned. However, we do start, especially a child above 5 years. The smaller children is a little, I don't have any child less than 5 years. I have only one child which has got an elevated PRA in all my years, less than 2 children, sorry. But then the usual age group I see the 7 years, 5 years following reimplant, 6 years following reimplant, the PRA comes in. Even recently, I have operated 9 years back. Suddenly the boy is 11 years, the PRA has shot up, his BP has shot up, PRA has went up, child is from Tanjavur. The PRA went up, but somebody there's a very good nephrologist there, he wanted to wait, because the BP was equivocal. Now the BP has gone up, the urea creatinine has gone up, and now, they are panicky. That is 9 months after the first recording of the urea. So I think to protect ourselves, let the pediatric nephrologist decide whether to start this antihypertensive or not. They do not start. Sometimes they make them come every month and whatever it is. But then from our end, this when I started doing PR is a little controversial because when I thought it was available, why not do it? And since it can predict the arrival of a renovascular hypertension, because only two major problems. Once you have a renovascular hypertension, you are done. For life, it is going to suffer from that renovascular. Secondly, is this the scarring is going to increase renal vascular resistance, and it is only a matter of time you get this renovascular hypertension. So I think as surgeons, we'll have to be, I'm not scanning anybody. Please keep that in mind also, because children, unlike previously, they don't leave us. The parents or the children don't leave us. They can. VVS did it. Vail Murugan did it. He never told me this. That is the narrative now. The previous narrative, 15 years when I started pediatrics at 95, they used to thank us. Thanks to Dr. Vail Murugan, my child is good. Now the narrative is, despite me going to Vail, I have a problem. The doctor did not tell me this. It has not been recorded here. That is the narrative. We have to, live with this new narrative, adapt to this new narrative by, using tests, which are, I mean, it is beyond the scope of this thing, but our pediatric chief was penalized by the court for not doing the routine retinopathy scan in way back in 1990. Okay, where the recommendation of IAP to do a retinal examination for all premature children started only in 1996. However, in 1990, a premature child was treated in a major children's hospital. He had, they have not done, for till blindness came, they didn't do a routine retinal thing. They missed it because the child went from one place to the other. However, 7 doctors were penalized. All the 7 pediatricians, so this thing, they had to pay a heavy thing to it went to the Supreme Court. They lost, though it predated the IAP recommendation by 6 years. I think most people in Tamil Nadu will know this particular case. So our professor of neonatology had to pay out. So at that time at Children's Hospital, so actually defaulted. The child went out, but then the court ruled that when the retina can be affected, why did you not insist? Why did the discharge summary not insist on a retinal examination? See, that is the narrative we have to get used to now. That is the point which I would like to make to juniors.
Dr. Vail Murugan, why I asked you to, I wanted you to publish it is, I just tell you 2 articles. One is from Akis Disease of Childhood, 5-year prospective study of plasma activity and blood pressure in patients with long-standing reflux nephropathy. And they concluded there was no direct correlation between blood pressure and PRA, plasma creatinine concentration or degree of scarring. Analysis of blood pressure standard deviation scores, however, suggested an excessive rise in blood pressure during the 5 years, but it was not related to PRA. There's another article again, prediction of blood pressure from plasma inactivity in reflux nephropathy. The data continue to support the role of renin-angiotensin system in the observed rise of blood pressure, but individual PRA measurements do not appear so far to predict reliably the onset of hypertension in affected patients. So these are the 2 papers that's already, there's nothing else. So other than Dr. Bajpayee's. So I think if you publish it.
Question to Vail. This is exactly why I put this question to Vail, because we actually had a discussion with our pediatric nephrologist. See, there is a concept that in reflux nephropathy, the AC inhibitors, or the newer medications like telmisartan and these sartans, they actually have a protective role to the kidney even in the absence of hypertension. That there is a concept, but how many of our pediatric nephrologists are actually starting the children on these medications? I don't think without hypertension.
VVS, I agree with you. They improve renal flow actually. They have a protective role on the kidneys. There are, it's obvious, But then again, our how many pediatric nephrology in a city like Chennai, we have only about 3 qualified pediatric nephrologists. So
I
a
think the
city of 80 lakh population. So it's very difficult to even for them to get convinced to start. They think it's a big step. The parents say antihypertensive is it's a big phobia. They say let it come and then we will start. So these are phobias we'll have to address. We'll have to keep telling these nephrologists. But then he is now, by seeing my cases, he feels that I have a lot of reimplants. So that particular pediatric nephrologist is now convinced, like he'll have to do something for that, despite yes, especially if the DMSA shows scarring, significant scarring. See, scarring was not going to improve following surgery or chemoprophylaxis or anything. What is gone is gone. So you'll have to accept that fibrosis is going to cause some amount of increased vascular resistance. So we'll depends on where that fibrosis is. So whatever it is, we'll have to engage them and convince them to do. And then I would put the onus on starting it on the pediatric nephrologist. I won't venture into that.
I think that is safer because sartans, losartan and other things not only increases kidney blood supply, it also increases brain, cerebral blood supply. So we don't know the later effects of that, especially in a developing brain. If you are going to flush it with this thing, what is going to happen? So that is why there is no reliable human trials to say that it is safe. That is the reason why the nephrologists are reluctant to start without hypertension, prophylactic or what you call preemptive treatment.
No, this is a nice discussion. We should have the role of how can we predict vascular hypertension. This is a very good offshoot of this particular case, because this hypertension is something we face in ICH. After we've got the small, the past 7 years or so, a lot of cases of hydronephrosis, pelvic junction obstruction, many, more than 50% of our WIMS tumors, all of them have got hypertension. Vesicular reflux, posterior urethral valve children. I think one of my assistants, Saravanan, is getting a paper ready on this, on renovascular. I think the problem is in ICH, we don't have, the Egmore Children's Hospital, we don't have PRA. We don't do PRA at government hospital. We will at least try to get this done, work on this and come back with our figures. I think in ICH, a lot of our renal cases have got elevated. After we know the normograms now, we have infants with 120, 70, 120, 90.
Okay, then I think we can call it a day.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Mohan Abraham. Thank you, Dr. Velmurugan.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. VVS. Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you. Good night, sir. Good night.
Very good night.
Good night, VVS. Bye.